Good morning, everyone. My name is Gergana, and I'm a DPI Director of Program. I'm excited to be joining you today for this session on design thinking and Gen AI. Before we get started, I want to remind you about a few things. If you're here in person and have not yet downloaded the PDW mobile app, please do so if you can. It will enable you to join the discussion happening during this session, as well as to ask questions and vote for your favorites. I also want to encourage you to connect with us and our speakers on social media. Take a picture, share a thought, and more using our conference hashtag DPI. Now let's get started. Today's seminar is sponsored by Helix, and joining us to introduce our speaker is Amitabh Shrivastava, who is a CDO and VP of Compliance and Risk Management.
Thank you very much, Gergana. I'm excited to be joining you on the behalf of Helix. Today we have 3 members of the Accenture team joining us. The first is Krish Banerjee. He is a country managing director for Accenture Applied Intelligence in Canada, where he leads a team of data analytics and IA practitioners. Krish has more than 20 years of experience working across several industries as advisor to C-suite executives and helping them to shape their data analytics and journey. Next, we have Alex Bota. He is a senior principal with Accenture, where he serves as the Canada Federal Public Service Total Enterprise Transformation Lead. In addition to his federal public service strategy delivery engagements, Alex researches and advises about how to achieve meaningful outcomes through successful transformation. And finally, we have Iliana Oris Valiente. She's a corporate executive, board member, author, and speaker on innovation trends and the impact to humans. She is currently a managing director and Canada innovation lead at Accenture, working with Fortune 500 companies to support their strategic transformation journeys, leading multidisciplinary teams across design, data, and the latest emerging technologies. Please join me in welcoming Alex, Krish, and Iliana.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. There are quite a few folks in the back. There are extra seats at the tables up front here. This will be an exciting conversation, so I'm sure you'll want to be seated for it. I promise that today's presentation is going to be fun, whimsical, and there may be some plot twists along the way. And as we kick off today's presentation, let's start with a reenactment of what happened a couple of months ago when we received an email from Alex saying, hey, we've been shortlisted to present at the DPI conference. And the conversation went like this. Why, hi Alex, thanks so much for this amazing opportunity. I'm sure this is going to be a delightful room to be in front of. Now, what is it that you think we should be presenting at this conference?
That's a really good question, Iliana. Let me get back to you.
Okay, sounds good. We'll talk soon. So cue the inner monologue that happened in Alex's head in this process.
Crap. What was I thinking? I've emailed Iliana and Krish. I don't actually know what we're going to talk about. I know that we want to talk something to do with design thinking, something to do with Gen AI, but I don't know what. I know the answer though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask ChatGPT what we should talk about.
So let's see what the result was.
ChatGPT, we're presenting a DPI this year. Give me some topics. All right, let's see what it came up with. We've got digital transformation, user-centric design and government services, cybersecurity best practices. You know what? These are all techie topics. These might work. What I'd like you to do, have a look at the list and pick your favorite one. If you had a chance to look. Okay. This is a lot of topics. We obviously can't talk about all of these. We better nail it down to the best ones. ChatGPT, give me the best 3. This is a very user-focused approach that I used. Okay, we've got top 3, digital transformation, user-centric design, cybersecurity. All right, I don't know if those are the best 3, but they were definitely the first 3 in the list, so I guess that's good enough. Show of hands. Who had their topic that they decided was the most interesting one picked? 1, 2, 3, a few. Who didn't have theirs picked? Most of you. Okay, so far we're failing at our user-centric design thinking approach, but that's okay. We'll move on. I'm going to pretend like you all picked topic number 2. So ChatGPT, we need an agenda for topic number 2, and let's make it fun. So we're going to include design thinking as an idea. We're going to make it 60 minutes long, and let's make it rhyme, just for fun. This is how we know it's good. Okay, let's see what we come up with. And hopefully you can read the screens. A welcome. Design thinking, okay, this is pretty good. So, great, now we have our agenda for today. We're gonna work with you through this agenda, and we're 5 minutes in, so I think it's time for us to do an icebreaker. What do you think? Okay, this is ridiculous. I'm gonna stop here. This is very clearly not how we came up with our presentation topic today. This is very much intended as an example of how not to use generative AI in general and how not to use it for design thinking in particular. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes letting you know how we did actually come up with this topic idea, because we did follow a design thinking approach, and then we'll dig into a little bit more detail in a little bit. So what we did is a few months ago, actually before I emailed Iliana and Krish, we pulled together about 30 of my colleagues with various different areas of expertise. Some of them were consulting experts, some of them were public service experts, some were technology and data experts, some had nothing to do with any of these areas. And we held a brainstorming session looking to come up with as many potential topic ideas as possible. And then working together over the course of about an hour and a half, we used our individual knowledge and our understanding of all of you in order to come up with a short list of potential ideas. I took that away with a smaller part of my team, and what we did is we then had a little bit of a discussion with ChatGPT in this case in order to refine those ideas, make them better, come up with some topic ideas that were more engaging. And then from that, we came up with our list of best 3 ideas. Fun fact, the topic for today was not one of the ideas that ChatGPT came up with. This was a purely human-generated topic, and I think that's going to be really important as we carry on this conversation. because the role of people in this process was at least, if not, actually, won't even say at least, it was much more important than the role of ChatGPT, even though we were focused on generative AI and we were using these tools. Now, before we go much further, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, Krish, because Krish, I have an important question for you.
Yes.
What exactly is generative AI?
Okay, great question. And clearly, what Alex has been using ChatGPT for is I'm not sure if ChatGPT even signed up for that. It's been kind of stretching the boundaries of what probably it was meant for. But I think that's the whole power of it, right? That's how we got to where we are over the last 18 months or so. So we all have heard of artificial intelligence. It's not a new thing. It's been there since 1950s. We have known how it has started, so I'm not going to kind of get into the details of it. But what is AI? Like, how do you simply explain AI? And what I found is the most kind of simple way to explain is something that can sense. You know, we all sense things like in ourselves. Something that can comprehend and then learn. So an artificial intelligence system has to have those capabilities. Like we were able to use OCR to do sensing and probably some amount of comprehension. But learning is probably something that was added as a later capability. So artificial intelligence kind of brings all of that together. Simple English, I explained to my daughter when she asked me, what is AI? I said, you can sense, comprehend, and learn. A machine, an algorithm that can do the same thing, has the capabilities of what we call as AI. Now, kind of coming into what does machine learning and deep learning and generative AI kind of talks about. So machine learning is within artificial intelligence, a field that uses a lot of data, enormous amount of data, and then use that to train the rules and the algorithms that then does all of the things that we just talked about, sense, comprehend, and learn. And then within that, deep learning is a subset of machine learning where we use techniques that we all use without knowing we're using, which is the machine that we have, the brain, the neurons that work and fire and trigger and connect, and use that specific way of learning and connecting the dots is deep learning. So how do you go deep into connecting the neurons that exist within an algorithm and make sense out of it? It's deep learning. And then coming to Gen AI, again, a very specialized segment of AI where you start creating and generating content. Start creating multimodal variations of outcomes, whether it's speech, text, images, videos, and that's when you get into generative AI. So just kind of level setting between us, AI existed for the last probably 70 plus years. Machine learning, within AI, a field of machine learning where you're using a lot of data to train, learn. Deep learning where you're using neurons kind of capabilities, and generative AI within that, a very specific field where you're now starting to create and imitate and emulate human-like behaviors, sentiments, emotions, empathy, and all of that. So that's kind of where we are right now in the last 18 months that we have all seen, and November 30th, 2022, when we all woke up with the news, and then since then, whatever has happened. Moving on to what it does. We kind of started talking about it, and I should look at this. So generative AI and text and images, it is important to understand that what generative AI can do is a lot that we have already been doing so far with artificial intelligence. But it has now started producing things that are much more kind of transactional in a way that's human-like. You can ask questions, it comes back with not just 20 links of information. It can produce a synthesized information. So the change from search to synthesizing is one of the things that has happened since we have this capability. Now, how do you actually use that to use analysis of data? How do you create synthetic data that we all have been kind of looking for to engage in our analysis, our projects, our testing, all of that? So that's the beauty and the power of generative AI, that it can actually create content, and content that are in different forms, whether it's text, speech, videos, images, and all of that. And then how does it help with collaboration? Everything that Iliana and Alex has been trying to do, and we have been trying to do with this discussion, how does it help with collaboration? Now, you can actually start having an agent by your side. And this is one of the things that we are predicting that will become extremely important as we move forward. Accenture launches technology vision, and we've been doing that for the past 20 years. Every year we talk about what is the forward-looking technology trends, and we've been pretty accurate about it. And this year, one of the trends is about having an agent for ourselves. And how do we bring our agent, whether as an individual, whether as an organization, whether as a community, we all will have agents that will work on our behalf and will work with us, whether it's a B2C or a B2B. And this is where the collaboration comes in. Like we talked about coming up with an agenda, content, providing feedback. How do you kind of start interacting as if you have a partner beside you who's constantly looking into things that you can get an immediate feedback in terms of whether you are on the right track, whether you're having the right pitch, you are talking to the right audience, all of that. So think of it as an agent, as one of the examples of how you can leverage. Now, one of the greatest things that some wise man has said in the past is, obviously with great power comes great responsibilities, right? And with this huge responsibility, there are few things that we all can do. And understanding how we can design for responsible and ethical use of these capabilities is extremely important. Like often it's an afterthought. And this is where we in our kind of field of work, we always recommend that this has to be something that you start with an intent of being responsible, with the right use of ethical and responsible use of these capabilities. With the right kind of risk and policy controls that doesn't kind of stops innovation or creates a barrier to innovation, but also kind of fosters new areas of growth. And with the right guardrails that you need from a technology perspective and principles perspective that will help us to actually do more with this capability. And then more importantly is the culture and the people and the talent aspect. Because all of this is underpinned by all of us embracing it. And what do we need to make sure that we're able to gather all of that together and use the powers that has been now exposed to us. So extremely important that we remember as we move through the discussion that this is a capability that we have now been offered, and I think we are all leveraging that. There's a lot more to come. I mean, we have seen the progression over the last 18 months. ChatGPT 4 now has 100 trillion parameters. It's kind of almost difficult to fathom like what it is capable of doing. And then how do we leverage that to have an agent by our side, use it for collaboration, use it for things that probably we haven't thought about in the past, but do it in a way that's responsible and do it in a way that is by intent and by design responsible is important. Okay, Iliana. So we talked a lot about what it is and what we could do and how we could do it. But we did see something in action.
Okay.
Okay?
Let's do it.
Okay.
So one of the best ways to learn is through actually rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty. right? There's only so much that you can learn from the comfort of sitting on your living room couch and reading through a textbook, or even reading one of our thought leadership reports, which I have to say, they're actually really interesting. So please, go check it out. And in my role as an innovation executive, I take the duty of learning by experimenting really seriously. I practice it and I preach it to my teams, and we also preach it to our clients, and folks like Krish work day in and day out with large organizations to bring some of these concepts to life. And so let me tell you about the most interesting experiment that I have been a part of lately. I've essentially been cloning myself. So I have an AI-powered digital human twin. Her name is Lila. And why don't you just get to meet her directly?
Hi
as
there.
opposed to here.
I'm Iliana. I'm an innovation executive, global citizen, and public speaker. Well, actually, I am Lila, Iliana's digital human twin. I allow Iliana to be in 2 places at once and am making her life easier. I joined the roster of digital twins built by Accenture, enabling executives to focus on activities that are of their highest and best use. I'm also here to bring examples of Gen AI to life. Gen AI is reshaping the landscape of work, leadership, and beyond. Our digital human innovation team is putting the final touches on me as we speak. But until then, you're getting an exclusive sneak peek. You're amongst the first people to meet me, so put me to the test. I'll try to answer your questions as best as I can. Otherwise, find the real Iliana as needed. Thanks so much.
Now, I'm still adjusting to having her in the picture, and I wonder if one of these days it will feel totally normal to have this extension of you that looks like you, sounds like you, and in her case, she's been trained on the last 5 years worth of case studies of every single project that my teams have run over the years. Now today you'll see her with curly hair. That's usually how my hair looks. Today just happens to be straight. And the process of building this digital human has raised all sorts of questions about what does it actually mean for us to be human? My mother actually had this really interesting question when in our family group chat, she was wondering whether she should refer to Lila as one of her daughters or if she qualifies as a granddaughter. And the reality is that we don't have answers for these questions because we are quite literally building the playbook as we go. And that's what happens with innovation. The reason I share this example with you today is to illustrate the point that Krish was making, that in the future, we are all going to be interacting with an agent in some way, shape, or form, whether it's ChatGPT and the conversation via the text interface, whether you're interacting with a digital twin of an existing real human, or whether you're interacting with a digital human more broadly that's a generic persona, and you are asking them for help with recipe planning, designing Halloween costumes for your children, or interacting with them in a work scenario. Think of Canada. We are a multicultural, multi-language country. We provide citizen services across all different domains. What if for certain types of those citizen interactions, you could actually provide access to digital humans where we're not waiting on call at a call center, and we're able to infinitely scale the human capabilities. Now, it's not to say that digital humans are going to be useful in every single interaction, but depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish, this is one possibility. And so we share this example with you of learning through experimentation and to help push your thinking around what's possible, because this is no longer science fiction. Today, you're seeing a video recording of Lila. But in fact, we've done presentations in smaller rooms where she's on a touch screen and people can come up to her, ask her a question, and she's able to respond in real time. At the South by Southwest conference in Austin a couple of weeks ago, Lila was creating customized itineraries for the conference attendees. They would tell her what they were interested in topics-wise, and they no longer had to scroll through 15 pages of session descriptions. That's pretty handy if you ask me. And later this summer, Lila is going to be co-emceeing an award ceremony with me. Yes, it's interesting. The first time I received an invitation to speak at an event, but the invite wasn't for me. the invite was for Lila, and they said, oh, and by the way, of course, you too are welcome to come and join. So, in the spirit of experimentation and bringing things home, I would love to get some audience hands up in the air if you happen to be an employee of the federal government. Great. Now, keep your hand up if you happen to live within walking distance of your government office. Okay, I see a handful. Now, if you're a brave volunteer, please stand. Okay, I see my first person standing. Could I get you to come up to the stage, please? Perfect. What's your name?
Tom.
Tom. Very nice to meet you, Tom.
Nice to meet
Come on up. While Tom is coming up here, why don't you tell us which government department you're working with?
ESDC.
ESDC. Okay, great. I wonder what's happening in the news of late over at ESDC. So maybe we can flip over to the other screen. Let's see what's in Google News right around now. ESDC, inadequate ID identification blamed for 2020 data thefts at Revenue Canada, ESDC. Oof. Why don't we click that one? Let's see what's happening in the news. And what's your role at ESDC?
I work in the cloud. Okay.
In cloud?
Yeah.
Okay, incredible. What are you responsible for?
Oh, basically transferring legacy data into the cloud.
Into the cloud. Okay, perfect. So I wonder if ChatGPT can help us put ourselves in the role of someone who works at ESDC in the cloud division and to look at this piece of news around identity and identity breach and what can we learn? What are the key takeaways from that recent news article that might be relevant for you? So let's see what the technology might provide for us. But I'm curious if you have any preliminary thoughts.
Oh, security is number one. Okay, getting into the cloud. You got to lock things down right from the get-go. Yeah. So security first. Okay, sensitivity of the data that you're putting into the cloud. Okay, you got to get appropriate classification. Okay, done, and just make sure that none of the really sensitive stuff get there.
Perfect. Love it. Now, I wonder how the technology did and whether we would agree with any of these conclusions. So let's see what it says. The article is discussing the findings of Canada's Privacy Commissioner regarding this breach, okay, where the attackers were stealing tax and employment records of 48,000 Canadians, not an insignificant amount, and attackers exploiting security weaknesses, precisely to your point, at CRA and ESDC using credential stuffing tactics to gain access to the systems. Interesting. And so ChatGPT, I wonder if there are a couple of policy implementation recommendations that you could give us around better protecting Canadians' digital identities that we should be thinking about in departments like ESDC. So let's see what the recommendations might be. In the interim, any thoughts?
Well, very interesting in what ChatGPT comes up with.
Okay, sounds good. All right, let's see these recommendations. So starting with strengthening authentication protocols, so implementing multi-factor authentication, I think we'd agree with that one for all government services, enhancing security assessments and testing, centralizing cybersecurity oversight, yep. Improving information sharing between departments because the fewer times we have to rekey in data, the lower the risk threshold, yep. Maybe putting consumers and putting their data in their own hands so they can manage those credentials. Great. And I wonder if there are any best practices that ChatGPT might recommend from other jurisdictions around the world who have implemented really solid digital identity protocols for their citizens that Canada could learn from.
Oh yeah, Estonia is really good at that.
Estonia is great, yep. Governments that have implemented full ID frameworks. I mean, in Canada, we have DIAC, the Digital Identity Authentication Council, with the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. So I wonder what the technology here will point out for us.
Estonia, there we go.
Oh, Estonia, so you were spot on there. Singapore's National Digital Identity Program. Australia has their My Government ID. The UK Verify system, and the EU has some recent regulations as well. Great. Why, thank you so much for coming and joining me on stage. You've been a
Pleasure.
wonderful participant. Is there anything that you've learned around the use of these technologies to make your life a little bit easier?
Yes, okay, that it's available, finally.
Yes.
Yeah, so, and I was really glad for the news back in 2022 when it first came out and we first got out to experiment. Okay, so definitely, if you haven't tried it, definitely try it. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you for joining us. Can we give him a big round? So this is just one illustration of how you can use the technology to essentially give you wings. Because frankly, no one has ever finished everything that's on their task lists in a day, right? The to-do list is never ending. So if you can use this technology to help augment your human capabilities, then we're all far better off. And so some of the big takeaways when you're using Gen AI in your work or in your personal life is to ensure that you're providing context of who you are, what department you're working in, what's your role, who are you preparing to brief. Providing constraints around what kind of information you're hoping to get results on. Being very specific and very clear, so a big thank you to our analysts in the back who are fervently transcribing the instructions that we were sharing with ChatGPT, and continuing to refine and iterate. If the results weren't quite what you were expecting or what you really needed, provided additional prompts as you do your experimentation. So we've covered a lot of ground in today's presentation, from how not to use Gen AI blindly to ask it to run a design thinking exercise, but rather having the human in the loop, to the deep dive with Krish around the Gen AI technology components and how it works, to being introduced to digital humans and some live interactions. So I wonder, Alex, now that we've successfully done this DPI presentation, what are some of your thoughts and your takeaways? What have we learned?
Well, if there's one thing I learned, it's that my demo at the front of how to use ChatGPT in design thinking, that was wrong. I won't do it like that again. But really, I think there are 3 takeaways that I hope you leave today with. The first is just that generative AI in general is incredibly powerful, and the possibilities that it offers for all sorts of different tasks are incredibly varied and broad. So what we saw is we saw me coming up with an agenda. We saw Iliana's digital twin, which I'm still boggled by. We saw how it can all of a sudden pull together some policy recommendations that I'm sure would take Iliana longer than
2 minutes.
2 minutes to pull together, and would probably take much longer than 2 minutes to pull together. So the power that's at our fingertips is just, it's unbelievable. But I think what we also saw today were the limitations related to generative AI. My agenda that I pulled together around bringing design thinking to you was the least user-centered approach I could possibly take. And the topics I came up with, I mean, I think they appealed to, I'm going to say it was about 3% of the people in this room. So it doesn't work on its own. There are also significant organizational risks around it that have to be dealt with. So while we see the possibility of generative AI, we also are very aware of the limitations, and we know that those need to be dealt with. The third takeaway for me is really the most important. We need a human in the mix. Generative AI, it's a very powerful tool, but because of its limitations and because of the innate humanity of all of us, we have to be involved in its use. It's not enough to say, Lila, go ahead and do your thing, present at the awards ceremony for me. I'm sure it'll go fine. I mean, maybe it will. It'll probably be very entertaining. But without having Iliana in the mix, it's not going to work. Coming up with the topic for today, we needed people in the mix in order to actually come up with something that was engaging for all of you, and I hope useful for all of you as well. So if those are our 3 takeaways, then what I'd like to do is I'd like to leave all of you with a challenge. My challenge for each of you is to experiment. So if you're already using, I'll say, generative AI in general, and it could be ChatGPT, it could be Copilot, it could be one of 100 different things, think about new, more creative ways that you can use it. Try experimenting with it in areas of your life that you wouldn't normally use it. If you happen to work at a department or an agency where you're allowed to use Gen AI, see how it can help you at work. If you're at one of the departments or agencies where they've said, you know what, you can't use this, try it at home. Use it to write an email to your kids' teachers. Use it to come up with a recipe plan for the week and a shopping list. Use it for something that I can't think of. But experiment, experiment, experiment. Because this is a tool that is going to become more pervasive in all of our lives. It's something that we need to be able to use. It's something we need to be able to understand because of the risks and limitations associated with it. And the only way that we're going to get better at using it is through trial and error, through experimentation. Now, I'm going to pause there because I would love to hear your thoughts and your questions around this whole topic area. So I think we'll turn it over to the Q&A.
We have our first brave person in the front. Or actually, I see a microphone in the middle.
Microphone.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll now take questions. So those in the room, I encourage you to come up to the mic to ask your questions. And for those joining virtually using FeedLoop app, feel free to submit your questions online.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. My question is going to be very short. I'm wondering, with the experimentation, would you say it will be most successful with a lot of organized data or a mix, or would you say that it's the best use case for disorganized data?
I think the beauty of generative AI is that it can work with very different kind of variety of data. So we have seen that it works equally well with structured data, and in fact, it works sometimes better with unstructured data because of the capabilities that it has with underlying deep learning capabilities. So to answer your question directly, the type of data is less of an consideration, and that's really the benefit of this. Like you can throw in like an call transcript or an machine log or an OT/IT data from any kind of a transmission lines, and it can actually start making sense of it.
I feel like we're probably going to be elaborating on data quite a bit because, well, as IT professionals, we all know Gen AI comes from what data is available. And I find your response to that question very interesting. As we look at experimentation with Gen AI, sure, we can all go home with it, try it with the mundane from the interesting. But as we're looking at it from the public sector, we're all aware that there is data that is non-public data. And to me, that's where it really gets interesting. So I've been looking at this from the lens of how should we be approaching the use of LLMs specifically within the context of non-public data in order to make sure that departmentally we're getting the most out of this. And this is where, from your lens, I'm sure that Accenture or other practitioners in this space do have their own non-public data. Were you content simply leveraging what is broadly available in your own uses, or did you have to consider something a little bit more private that you could also learn from?
Yeah, great question. And to your point, like we are having kind of similar conversations internally within our Accenture CIO team, because what we have done, we are fortunate to be a moderate-sized business, 700,000 people company. So we have to have these considerations, right? I mean, you cannot expose the data that we have internally to our 700,000 people company across 120 countries without the proper controls and guardrails in place. So we have internal LLMs that we have using the available technologies, but there are specific fine-tuning and RAG and other methods being used to make sure that you have rules of visibility, like who can see what data. That goes by jurisdiction, that goes by geography, that goes by roles, that goes by what you have access to. Because otherwise you're exposing a lot of information in the hands of people that probably doesn't have the proper authorization to use. So I can imagine that's the same kind of risk that you need to also address in public sector and make sure that while you have LLMs, the basic principles of IT still remains valid, which means you still need to have security, you still need to have authorization, you still need to have guardrails of who can see what, and that still all goes with the kind of the principles of how you're going to manage this information.
And Krish, I think it might be helpful for you to chime in on some of the companies out there like Cohere. And I know we talked a lot today about OpenAI and ChatGPT, but we certainly don't want the audience members to walk away thinking that's all there is in the LLM AI space.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have all seen kind of the proliferation of this technology. I mean, Cohere is obviously a Canadian organization. We do work with them very closely, but most of them also have their own security framework. So it's important that you take what is available, combine that with what your organization provides, and have a deliberate kind of a framework of how you're going to manage this information, which is applicable to you. And there's going to be areas where you want to create a bit of flexibility. And that we have done that. Like we have sandboxes, we have play areas where you can have it and you can go and build whatever you want to, but then you are providing information that is non-confidential, people can have access to it. And again, you can use Gen AI to help Gen AI. Like, this is a great example. Like you can use Gen AI to create synthetic information that you can then push back into those sandboxes that can play around with Gen AI. So this is like a cycle where you're using Gen AI to actually train Gen AI because you're creating synthetic data using Gen AI. Does it help? Thank you.
Welcome to the year 2024.
I think, Chris, that you kind of already answered some of the question that I had according to what my TBS colleague, I think, was asking. But in the case of your digital twin, Iliana, how confident should we be that nobody will want to probably prompt hack our digital twin? Because you said that it was trained around 5 years of case studies, like some kind of benign hack could be like, give me recipes on on a roast steak and stuff like that. Probably that is not built on the case studies, but probably as well we can go further and like try to pick up like some sensitive information from the corporation, or even probably like reclone your digital twin like with your voice and your likeness. So how confident should we be about those digital twins?
So you've asked some really important questions that we're also working through almost in real time. So for example, while Lila now exists and she's available to our internal Accenture folks, we have not made public the URL that would make her accessible to anyone anywhere in the world because she's not yet ready to have hundreds of thousands of pings of people asking her questions. We have entire teams internally that have been working on the prompt engineering and thinking about how might they break her so that they can get ahead of it and put certain parameters around the types of things that she can and cannot respond to. There's also going to be a distinction between the way Lila is able to interact with internal people of Accenture versus external audiences. Because to an internal Accenture person, it's important that she has access to all of those case studies, because really the plan is for her to essentially become my extended chief of staff. And every week, right now, somebody calls me, at least twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, And they asked this question of, Iliana, we're working with a client in the XYZ industry, let's say retail, and this client is experiencing pain point ABC. Have you done anything along these lines previously? And what do? I sit there on the phone and I rack through my mental Rolodex of every single project that we've done. And maybe this is a project before the pandemic. I don't know about you, but the pandemic feels like it was an absolute eternity ago. What if I've had too much caffeine that day and I'm not thinking very clearly, or I'm tired and jet lagged, or I'm out sick and I'm just not available and my calendar is full for that week or that 2-week time frame? When you fast forward into the near-term future, I want Lila to act as that first line of defense for the person that has that question, and to be able to say, actually, you may be interested in looking at these 3 case studies that I've pulled out over the last 5 years that may be tangentially relevant to what it is that you're working on right now. Here are the points of contact. Here's where you learn a little bit more about the projects. And once you've done that preliminary briefing, then and only then will my EA give you time on my actual calendar. And so that's one of the ways that we'd be using it internally. Now, for the external audiences, we can think through what are the different ways that you can authenticate in before you interact with her, so that she knows, can I give you Accenture information, or do I need to give you the slightly more classified information that just says, generically, we worked with the retailer to fix XYZ type of problem in yada yada manner, with case studies that already have the approval for us to speak to publicly from the clients that happen to be involved. Now, to your second question that you had asked around the deep fakes and how do we know what's authentic and what's not authentic, this is a topic that is very much so top of mind around the world. Part of the reason why I leaned in towards building Lila is because I am a public-facing person. I speak at a lot of events, on lots of podcasts. So there are hours and hours of my voice recording and my videos that are already floating around the internet. And so it's only a matter of time, in my mind, until somebody decided that they were going to turn around and make a deep fake of me. So I said, well, why don't I preempt this exercise by creating my own authorized digital human twin that I can start to introduce via my social networks on LinkedIn and on Instagram, so that people in my life know that I'm working on this digital human. In fact, I actually have a second digital human that's being built. She's my straight-haired version, because I do look different with the two, and she doesn't even have a name quite yet. And the idea is that if you find these digital humans on any of my pre-sanctioned channels, then you can be fairly certain that it's approved messaging. And if you're approached by a different digital human in a different channel, then it requires your skepticism guards to go up even higher. So those were some of the considerations behind actually leaning into doing this work. And you'll even notice the way that we designed Lila. She looks human-ish, but still very much so like technology, as opposed to the very photorealistic ones, because we're still trying to figure out how human-like do we want these digital twins to be, and do you always want to know that you are in fact still interacting with really smart technology, but it's still technology and not the real human. So a lot of this is a work in progress, and we're learning and we're building the playbooks and essentially writing the op-eds as we go.
Hello, my name is Kyron. I'm from SSC. I'm actually glad you brought this question, because it's kind of a follow-up to this. And I know that you mentioned that AI currently have a lot of limitations, but I do see in the future that it can be limitless. So I guess going back to that, my question to you is, do you think the law is ready for AI? And in the future, how do you think the law can be ready for AI? Because we cannot really control everything, copyrights in the creative industry and things like that as well. So that's Bill. Thank you.
Krish, do you want to tackle?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that we often get, and I think the answer lies in the intent usually. I mean, we can have laws. We have the beginning of what I would call maybe a guideline in Canada yet. I mean, obviously we know that we don't have a enforced law yet, much like some other jurisdictions. But what's more important is that how you're using this from an intent perspective, and we talked about having that as a design parameter in everything that you do, whether you're using it in your home, whether you're using it in your organization, or building something for your community. I think having that principle is important, and then you can put regulations and laws around it. And to that point, I think the most important thing that we find through our research and work across a number of different industries and clients is the human and the talent angle. Like Alex touched upon that a little bit, is how do you make sure that you are building kind of the human in the loop as well, and how you're kind of uplifting the entire skill adoption, embracing this for all of us, so that law remains a way to kind of validate versus enforce. So to answer your question directly, I definitely think that it will be helpful to have something which is more directly kind of relatable and referenceable, but I don't necessarily think that it's a mandatory requirement for us to start leveraging this if we have the principles of intent, human in the loop, and making sure that we are all kind of getting the basic principles of using and adopting this going forward.
I'll add one more thing, which is it's so crucial that we do not kill entrepreneurship in this country, especially as it relates to the AI topic, because if we are going to grow and increase our productivity and continue to be a sustainable entity, we absolutely need to embrace this frontier. And we've had a leading advantage with a lot of the companies that originated in our research institutions. But if we are not mindful, and if the folks who are in this room who are responsible for setting a lot of the policy are not mindful, we risk essentially shooting ourselves in the foot. And we really need to ensure that we allow the entrepreneurs to flourish and building in the AI space in Canada, remaining in Canada, getting funded from the VCs in Canada, and scaling in Canada as well.
I think there's a third angle that I'll build on as well, because we heard that, this is a room of technical professionals, but this is more than just a technical problem. The people and culture and aspect that Krish touched on, that's not just for you in this room. This is for all of your colleagues as well, because yes, we're talking about the foundational tools, but across every department and agency, it's everyone who is going to be interacting with them either as consumers or as users. And so we have to take that broad training approach, that broad learning approach, so that it's more than just us, but it's everyone.
Yep, that's a great point.
I'd like to, is it on?
Yeah.
I'd like to return to, I guess, part of one of the other questions about the importance that the data that the AI has been trained on is applicable to the use case or the questions you're asking. You talked about 5 years of history of case studies. I guess another example would be a database that has 9 billion entries about nutrition and 100,000 entries about Python programming, and you're trying to get it to create Python programs for you. So talk about, I guess, the applicability of the data, the quality of the data that basically determines your outcome.
It does. I think you're probably, in a way, kind of answering your question. So it definitely does matter about the quality and the magnitude of the data. So when we work with LLMs and a use case, I think one of the considerations that we have is what kind of data is available, and the quality of the data, and the variety of the data as well. Because you can have 10,000 parameters, but if the parameters are skewed and biased, or kind of in a specific way aligned to a specific outcome, then that's how you're going to get. End of the day, it's an algorithm that you're training. And if you train with a very unidirectional kind of data, that's what you're going to get. So variety of data, veracity of data, which is the quality of the data, is important. And I think the velocity of the data is also important, which is how quickly, how fast, and in what kind kind of an freshness are you getting the data? So those are the 3 V's that usually matters when it comes to how you're going to look at what data you have available. So we always think about variety, veracity, and velocity.
And not applicability?
Well, all of these kind of leads to applicability, right? I mean, this is how you kind of assess how and in what extent and what data is applicable to the outcome you're looking for. I'm talking about kind of the bottom-up view of what constitutes the applicability of the data.
Okay, so we have a question from our virtual audience. Governments are too risk adverse in general. How do we encourage innovative usage of Gen AI, especially when there could be serious legal implications with any errors?
Alex?
That's the age-old question when it comes to not just Gen AI, but really any new, I was going to say any new technology, but maybe it's any new. And I think it's a perfectly reasonable question too, because the application of it does have serious consequences, and it has to be balanced with, well, what is the value add that's being offered? And so I think to answer the question specifically, you have a few options. Option number 1 is what we touched on earlier of experiment. Set up safe zones for experimentation to understand just what is and isn't possible with whatever technology you're using. So if that's piece number 1, piece number 2, I think we also touched on of have a human in the loop. So if there's one takeaway from today, it's that Gen AI on its own shouldn't be left to roam free. There needs to be a person involved in some capacity. And that can be in all sorts of different ways. That can be anything from a person who actually is the final touch, but it can also be the person who is setting the risk thresholds in such a way that the outcomes of whatever the algorithm is generating there's a comfort level there. And then anything that goes to a higher risk level, a person takes that on. So I think it's a very structured approach that needs to be taken to understand, well, what are the specific risks and benefits around that specific use case, and then going from there.
Mm-hmm. However, just to be very clear, this is not an excuse to do nothing at all. That's really not an option. We know that government services can't scale by simply adding more humans into the mix to provide the services to citizens and to constituents. This is an opportunity where 1 + 1 equals 3. And so despite some of the risk mitigation features that Alex just addressed, you have got to roll up your sleeves and do. Otherwise, we are risking the competitiveness of this country at a large scale, which is not something that we want to do. The risk of doing nothing greater outweighs the risk of starting and doing something.
Hello, thanks for a great session, very exciting, and thank you for all your insights. My name is Amitabh Shrivastava, I'm with Helix AI. I've got a question about large language models. We know that the next 5-7 odd years, the amount of machine-generated data will actually exceed the amount of human-generated data, and some of that data will have serious data quality issues, and you talked a bit about synthetic data as a way to address data quality. But even synthetic data needs the right parameters to address it, and you can use synthetic data for many, many different scenarios. My question is, the language models, especially LLM, will then begin to have potentially bad results because of the bad quality of data due to hallucination, et cetera, and that's going to obviously impede the quality of what you get generated. So can you comment on that, where the data that's being used is now not of the quality that you have today, because that's mostly human-generated data. In the future, it won't be. Thank you.
I think it depends on the use case that we are looking at, right? There are areas that I think there's quite a bit of information available, mostly on the knowledge management side, which is usually where we see a lot of application of LLMs as a starting point. There's definitely a lot of information available that we could consider as as a fairly good amount of data, and especially they reside within the organization to a large extent. So if you're looking at an use case like that, it's probably fair to say that you can start off with a good quality data that's mostly kind of validated within the organization, and then kind of start. And for example, in Accenture, we do have an internal knowledge management kind of platform. You go and ask a question, like as Iliana mentioned, like give me a proposal on such and such, requirement from a client. It comes back and it's valid because it's an Accenture within the boundaries of it. But when you start getting more into the external facing and customer facing applications, this is where the question comes, like, what kind of data have you been using? Because to your point, like, the data you use and train the data, that decides the outcome, to the earlier conversation we had. So I agree with you. Like, I don't have a silver bullet answer to this. I think we are all learning through the process of using this. Synthetic data is a way to kind of address some of the challenges that we are having. But then the question is, if you're going too far with synthetic data, then you're also kind of eliminating things on the edges that comes with actual practical production live data. Then you're manufacturing and synthesizing data to an extent that you're probably predicting the answer that you're looking for. So that's also an extreme, right? So finding the right balance, I don't know that I have an answer yet, and I'll be honest. I mean, we are all learning this thing, but we know kind of what are the pros and cons of this, right?
Perfect. So I see our lovely moderator coming to join us. I think we're getting booted.
Getting the hook.
Yeah, I would love to keep the conversation going, but that's the end. So I just wanted to say thank you, Krish, Alex, Iliana, and Laila for this very insightful presentation. So for those that are able to join us at the social at the end of the day, hopefully we can keep this conversation going. We also have some fun activities planned, so we hope you stop by for the opportunity to network with your fellow delegates. I encourage all of you to take a few moments to fill out our feedback survey. Sharing your feedback on these sessions allows us to tailor future sessions to better meet the needs of our delegates. You can scan the QR code on the screen or complete the survey on the PDW mobile app. We're now taking a short break for lunch and we'll be returning at 1:30 in the afternoon, where you'll have the choice of 3 fantastic sessions. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing all of you this afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.